So Rockstar Games has had its fair share of taking the GTA formula and experimenting with it in different worlds and settings. The most prominent example of this would be the Red Dead series, with of course the exception of the first game. But apart from that and LA Noire to some extent, they put that formula into one other title that didn't involve driving cars, robbing banks and stomping on prostitutes after a bit of woohoo. This was a title that absolutely deserves a sequel, one that I implore people who have not yet done so to play, and it is Canis Canem Edit, commonly and also known as Bully. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to another episode of this series that I for some reason call a game or series that needs to return. This video is all about Bully, a game that is often said to be one of Rockstar's underappreciated titles. I'll talk about the Bully game in general, a bit of development history, what it was all about, what made the game great, and where we are with a continuation and its potential these days. Also, timestamps for various segments of this video are in the description if you'd like to skip through it. Other than that, let's get on with it, shall we? Bully is a third-person action-adventure title developed by Rockstar Vancouver, who were once known as Barking Dog Studios and went defunct in 2012. The team over in Vancouver were merged with Rockstar Toronto or given the option to relocate to another office. All this following the release of Max Payne 3. Set in a fictional town called Bulworth in the US, Bully stuck you in the shoes of 15-year-old Jimmy Hopkins, a rebellious teenager with a likely tempestuous background. The game started out with Jimmy being dropped off at what he called the worst school in the country, Bulworth Academy, a boarding school with a neo-Gothic design resembling something you're likely to see in some of the schools and colleges in the UK, as well as New England, or so I'm told. Jimmy landed in a school chock full of bullies, bitches and pompous brats, and had to defend himself while attempting to rise through the ranks of the various school groups, all the while going through the usual amusing and awkward problems that come with adolescence. Bully, like the GTA games before and after it, focused on the main story while allowing you to explore an open world by various means, and get sidetracked by a number of optional missions and minigames. The latter actually played a big role in this and could be found in abundance both in and outside the main story. It is very much a title you could describe as a teenage Grand Theft Auto, or a more mature Harry Potter where the protagonist can be an arsehole yet a cool one and there's no magic. Honestly, Bully is that unique it's hard to name a similar title. So, there are bits of info out there on the game's development, and there are plenty of things that were changed and removed for the final version. It's speculated that development for Bully began around 2003, and was possibly a product in the making when Rockstar Vancouver was known as Barking Dog Studios. However, in late 2003, Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar's overlord, purchased the company and labelled it Rockstar Vancouver. Their first game under the big umbrella was supposed to have been a Spec Ops title. That was later cancelled for reasons still unknown, and Vancouver's first game ended up being Bully. It is said that with the purchase of Barking Dog came an amped up development of the game. Bully was announced in May 2005 for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, and had a release date for October that same year. But, as is the custom with Rockstar titles, the game was delayed and didn't release until October 2006. A good number of things were changed and removed in the final PS2 version, such as character models and names. The boys' dormitory was supposed to have had 2 floors, Jimmy was planned to have the ability to take money from knockdown characters, the academy itself was supposed to have had 3 floors, and there was another group called the Punks that were apparently cut from the game very early on. There's more information on changes and cut content on the Bully wiki if you're interested, and there are some links down below to that wiki list and some interesting videos detailing all of this cut content. Bear in mind though, it's a wiki, so don't take everything you see there as 100% fact. Now, some of you might know that I said it was to release for both the PS2 and original Xbox, yet you may be aware that Bully on the original Xbox was never seen. There is hardly any information about this in particular out there, and all that can be said here is that the Xbox version was cancelled. But the question was, and still is, why? There wasn't and isn't any concrete information as to why this was cancelled, but it has been speculated that it could have been due to the Rockstar and Sony deal, where all of their games released on the PlayStation 2 before any other platform. Then there's also the belief that it was cancelled as Microsoft abandoned the original Xbox for the 360, which would release under a year before Bully actually came out. Then, of course, there's the possibility Microsoft refused to have the game on their system simply because of the huge controversy surrounding the game. As you could have expected, the game caused a great deal of controversy among politicians, anti-bullying organisations, educational staff and parents. It didn't help that Rockstar's previous titles were for an adult crowd, and generated a heap of controversy themselves on top of Bullies. So when you think about it, it was quite a dangerous product of its time. Don't forget, this was a time where there were a lot of misconceptions and pure ignorance in regards to video games, and to be honest, there still is. So the title's name and inclusion of violence towards small kids and teenagers, despite you playing as a teenager, was heavily criticised, and caused certain retailers and governments to ponder on whether or not this should be stopped and banned. Also adding to the flames was Jack Thompson, the activist and lawyer who likes to blame video games for violent events. He tried to raise the pitchforks towards Bully as well as GTA and other titles. However, his crusades against Rockstar and probably all games that depict violence in some form or another failed, so not a great deal happened. However, in the UK, one of the countries whose classification board tends to be cool about various media, a Labour MP came out to say that the game should be banned or rated 18. The BBFC gave it a 15. Due to the game's title seemingly causing issue as well, Rockstar thought bugger it, we'll change it to Canis Canem in European regions. This is the version I remember so fondly playing when I was young and dumb. Personally, I always thought Canis Canem was a cool name. It's Latin for dog eats dog. It refers to a situation where no one is safe from anyone. Basically each man for himself. A perfect way to describe Bulworth really. And it's the Academy's motto. So yes, it stirred up controversy, but the irony is, it's probably one of Rockstar's least violent video games. So the game was later remastered in the Bully Scholarship Edition, and yes, that title was permitted in Europe. This was made for the Nintendo Wii, Xbox 360 and PC. It came with new missions, 4 new classes, new characters, clothing and achievements, as well as a slight graphical update. It is the version you are seeing in this video, so of course, not everything will be as you may remember it if you played the original. So Bully was released into the world in October 2006 on the PlayStation 2, later in 2008 on the 360, Wii and PC. The initial game was met with, apart from a heap of controversy, many favourable reviews from both critics and users. The narrative, characters and humour of the game were the noteworthy praises, whereas the minigame's repetition, camera and slow start were the main points of criticism. Plus, as I remember, there were a number of issues with the game on PS2. Bully Scholarship Edition aimed to enhance the overall experience with all its extras, and did to some extent, but to be honest, I wouldn't call it a remaster. As some have said before, it could be viewed as a naff port. There was and is an annoying 30 FPS cap on PC, and to top that off, as is turning out to be the usual with all the games nowadays, runs like crap on Windows 10. The 360 version apparently had or has a lot of issues as well. Now Bully started off with Jimmy Hopkins being dropped off by his mum and new rich stepfather at Bulworth Academy. He was there after being expelled from several schools already, and while his parents went off on a year-long honeymoon. As soon as he arrived, he witnessed and became subject to the horrendous and violent life of the school students and to some extent, the faculty. He was introduced to what at first seemed to be the main antagonist, the self-righteous and oblivious Dr. Crabblesnitch. What a name. But not long after this meeting, Jimmy met the little Petey Kowalski and narcissistic schemer Gary Smith. Gary, a character you just wanted to punch from the get-go, acted as a mentor to Jimmy, showing him around the school and introducing him to the various groups who do nothing but scrap. Gary later went on to reveal his intentions of taking over the school, a plan of which both he and Jimmy worked together to achieve. However, not to spoil much in case you've yet to play this, that soon changed, and Jimmy found himself trying to expand his own dominance over the main cliques of Bulworth. On top of that, he had to navigate the trials and tribulations that came with dealing with the questionable staff and prefects on site. It was a classic rise through the ranks type of story as Jimmy attempted to gain respect from all who surrounded him, whether it be ingenious nerds that need saving, or not so bright jocks that needed a beating. They were all for Jimmy to conquer. Now the narrative in Bully was good, nothing spectacular but just good. Its over-the-top stereotypical characters were excellent, there were a big variety of personalities that kept things interesting as you went along. Excellent characters such as Jimmy, Gary and Pete, a drunk but decent-ish English teacher, a disgustingly amusing cook, and then of course, the various clique leaders, each with their own personality and reasons to want to punch them. The voice acting was decent, it was quality work for a cast mostly consisting of new, inexperienced and or unknown actors. For example, Jimmy Hopkins was voiced by Jerry Rosenthal, an actor who'd appeared on television here and there but who after, or maybe even before Bully, went on to teach private music lessons and do professional gigs. Here's hoping he returns to Bully in the future, but not just because I want to see Jimmy again, but also because he has talent as a voice actor. So the story comprised of 6 chapters, and later when you thought Jimmy had finally achieved the kingly status, things took a classic turn for the worst, though I don't use the term classic as a criticism. A group not actually a part of the academy was introduced in a later chapter, became the unknown enemy to all of the game, and Bully's story became one of a rise to power and the loss of it. Rome may not have been built in a day, but it certainly fell in one. So there were a few interesting twists and turns. Add that on top of the well-written dialogue and nicely done voice acting, you had a story that kept you interested throughout. Although, for a number of reasons, the first chapter to some is and will probably be the worst. As I said, one of the main criticisms this received was its slow start, as the first chapter was a somewhat linear designed one and more or less one big tutorial. But it had its moments. However, if I'm being honest, I'd criticise the last chapter for being too short, but every great product has its flaws. One of the main things I could praise this game for, specifically its story, its humour. Bully was a funny game, both in scripted sequences and free roam. There were many humorous situations, such as Jimmy catching the school's perverse gym teacher strolling out of a pornography shop that was cleverly and amusingly called Come Hither. Of course, Rockstar Games' humour was implemented in a way that only Saints Row could rival. There were Santa missions that were great, dressing up as a ninja or running around with a big bag of fries on your head delivering food. In fact, in that first chapter alone was a Halloween mission, and Bully is one of those few games that did holiday events such as that quite well. This mission was just a prank fest, and it was childish but amusing. Though for those that have played this, I preferred the big game mission. For those who don't know, let's just say it involved a rigged ball, glue and benches, you know, that sort of thing. I bet the devs had a whale of a time coming up with ideas for this. It was the variety of tasks that kept things interesting from start to finish, and the childish, comical pranks of revenge and point making remained throughout the narrative. So Bully had some interesting mechanics, and time was one of them. This played a big role when it came to missions. Certain ones were only available at certain times, for instance. An interesting mechanic, but one that seemed to have been replaced in later, similar Rockstar titles, with the game automatically changing the time and weather to suit a particular mission, like you often see in Grand Theft Auto 5. I suppose either is good enough, but sometimes it was annoying to have to wait until 12 PM or later to do some things. But time in Bully changed the way you played it. You only had a certain amount of time to do things before Jimmy would, for some reason, pass out on the spot at 2 AM. Things would become a bit more difficult when you add in truancy and curfew, so you had to be careful when doing things during class and after 11 PM. This was a school setting after all, so yeah, you were required to go to class. Skipping class meant you had to constantly dodge the figures of authority, which could be irritating during missions, so maybe a slight design flaw. You could look at that as a praise for realism, but considering this game had UFOs, automatic spud cannons and a powerful rubber band ball, I don't think Bully was striving to be American School Simulator 2006. So moving on to another great and at the time, maybe now, fresh aspect of Bully was its combat. Naturally, in a world such as this, Jimmy had the ability to defend himself and if you wanted to, smack others for no other reason than you simply wanted to. As the story progressed, Jimmy built up his arsenal in the form of damaging gadgets and learning new combat techniques from a hobo living right next to the school in exchange for transistors. Such moves that swept enemies off their feet or sent them down to the ground with a hard high roundhouse. Surrounded by groups that were more likely to spit in your face than nod as you walked by, combat was a necessary and satisfying element. It was the only way other kids came to respect you, by seeing that Jimmy could knock them down again and again. However, Jimmy came across as someone who saw fighting like a visionary might see money, a mere tool to use to get anywhere with certain people. There were instances in the game where Jimmy made it clear he had no desire to fight, but with Bulworth being what he was, he had no choice. It was thought early on that Jimmy would actually be a bully, rather than a kid that stands up to them. But players did have the ability, as you could expect, to attack anyone whenever they pleased. Bullying was actually a mechanic itself, though the game labelled it as humiliation. If you're interested in this further, then there's a comprehensive page on the Bully wiki for this. Basically, humiliation was the sort of combat finishes of the game. The moves would vary depending on who you were fighting, and considering the age of the characters and the concept, there were no lethal takedowns or weapons. All Jimmy could do was knock people down on the floor, and it was a welcome change. I liked this idea in a time where killing enemies in games was, and of course still is, a prevalent thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that in a video game, but the non-lethal combat route tends to be a nice change and causes developers to innovate more, and us players to be more challenged. It likely stirred up some interesting thoughts on the weapons that would be implemented. I'd love to have seen what was on the drawing board for weapons in particular. There were a good number of these in Bully, and all were weapons you'd more likely see in the possession of an adolescent, ranging from the old-fashioned slingshot to a spud gun that fired not bits of potato, but entire spuds. You also had things such as classic stink bombs, eggs, itching powder, marbles, and sometimes a baseball bat would make an appearance. Although weapons and the like were nice, nothing beat the satisfaction of Bully's unarmed combat. Your fists and feet were your best weapons. Add in the different styles of combat the various clique members would use, fights in Bully were often changing, thus a bit more interesting. However, Bully wasn't a difficult game. Fighting a student, even one of the tougher ones, wasn't that challenging, even when you became surrounded. You did start to question whether or not you should leg it and throw a couple of bags of marbles down for a satisfying escape, but often you could fight it out. Boss fights were another decent part of the combat and were a nice change from the standard scraps with the average clique member, but again were not particularly hard, so it would have been great for it to have been more challenging. So the hand-to-hand stuff was the most satisfying, but weapons could provide a laugh or two. Firecrackers were always great and banana peels were delightful. Also, kick me signs were a short joy, and sometimes playing frisbee with a dustbin lid and someone who isn't aware they're playing such a game with Jimmy was another way you could pass the time in this. Now the soundtrack for the game was fantastic. Coming in from the talented Sean Lee, each track suited every single moment it was aiding. One of the well done things in regards to this was the relation between combat and music. Each clique had its own combat track that would play when Jimmy fought them, and some of them were beautifully suitable for the cliques they represented. Though, to name my favourite track, that would be Beach Rumble. It was a real gritty free-for-all fighting track. Now Bully's world, along with its details, was probably one of the best Rockstar ever made, despite half the map not holding much in the way of interest. New Coventry and the industrial area weren't really attracting in terms of content. While you may look at Bulworth as small in comparison to other open world titles at the time, it was the perfect size for a game such as this, and as we see clearly from open world titles now, big does not mean better. Traversing on foot, skateboard, cycling bike or even a scooter made it feel big enough if nothing else did. One of the things that came with a smallish world to explore was an increased chance to see all of the random things that might have happened. Bully's world felt alive because of its handcrafted NPCs, each with their own name, personality and the interactions they'd have with each other as well as Jimmy. Rockstar made an effort to not have random spawning generic NPCs roaming around, and even though you did end up seeing the same person over and over again, the game was better for it. In relation to the story, it allowed you to look back on a number of the characters at the end and remember the moments you had with them, whether that be the amusing times with Big Bad Russell, or aiding in establishing a relationship between the English and art teacher, to Jimmy's dismay. Rockstar included the ability to talk to the characters in the world. Locking onto them allowed you to speak to them in a positive or negative manner. Positive with certain ladies and gents could lead Jimmy to getting a kiss, or offers of giving Jimmy a hand in combat for a bit of money. Negative comments could lead to, well, unsurprisingly, a fight, but that could be avoided with the apology option that was upgraded by attending English class. It's the little details that impress me in a game, and Bully certainly had its fair share. One thing I love in games is when they acknowledge events such as Halloween or Christmas. This did both and very well. Halloween was just one mission, but Christmas time was a whole chapter. Snow covered Bulworth, people and students dressed in warmer attire. Snowball fights could break out, and to top that off, you had access to missions only available during this time. For example, snow shoveling detention and receiving a Christmas gift from Jimmy's mother. Customization in this was also decent. There were some cool outfits and pieces of clothing Jimmy could wear. You could also give him a different haircut and later on give him a tattoo. When I discovered the 80s rocker outfit from completing music class in the scholarship edition, I wanted to start an 80s rocker clique. I'd join it, even if I am on the wrong side of 20. Though, I'm not sure leopard trousers would suit me. Probably. Too tight on the arse. Another cool detail that I honestly wish we saw more in various games was how Jimmy's room became decorated with objects over time. Some appeared after completing certain missions, others from collecting collectibles and finishing classes. And although Jimmy had his room in the boys' dormitory, you were also able to go out and obtain handouts across the map. Now when it came to the free roam, side missions, and even sometimes during the main story, mini-games played a huge role in Bully. In the story, you had mini-events such as the cow dance, but outside of the narrative is where they were prevalent, many of which involved a bit of gambling. Arcade machines were scattered all over the place for Jimmy to use, anything from a space racer to a monkey-flinging poo game. Then you had sporty-type games found at the academy such as keep-ups and penalty shots, and you had racing which involved either bikes or go-karts. Speaking of go-karts, there were all the games you could have a go at the fairground. These games, including go-karting, rewarded you with tickets you could turn in for prizes at a prize tent. Unlike reality, these prizes weren't bad. Anything from a poster to an actual scooter. Jimmy was also able to carry out jobs for money outside of school. Paper routes and mowing the grass, the usual jobs you might find younger teens doing. And they paid surprisingly well. $25 for mowing a patch of grass. If these monetary rewards were and are somewhat legit, I'm in the wrong naffing business and or place. However, the main set of minigames in Bully were those found when attending class. Classes in Bully were repetitive minigames that were nicely rewarding challenges, except maybe biology and bloody maths. Biology was dull and the timer for maths was brutal. Though even in reality I found biology boring and I friggin' hated maths. A plus N plus D equals and, okay? I added them together and got a result. Anyways, yeah, Rockstar loved their time missions, and I'm glad we see that less often in gaming now. But classes were worth doing for the rewards. You'd get things such as an upgraded chemistry set and better bikes, etc, etc. Half the classes were not even available until later on, which is one reason I can agree to that criticism of the game having a slow start. So much opened up and became available in that second chapter. This is, or rather was, common with Rockstar games, whether it was gates or bridges closing off an entire area or features unlocked later on. You always had something to look forward to and strive for, if you knew about that trend. Now it's funny looking back on this game's dialogue, something I'd have not taken much notice of when I was younger, but now I see how petty some of it is. The tough guy act, the need to look cool by doing stupid things and in turn being a complete ass. You realise when you're older, especially after playing this, even though it isn't real, how frequent that was in you or other people during your teenage years. Or you might be seeing it now if you're going through those years. Although, when you think about it and look at the adults of this game, it might just be me, but they do remind you of adults that are worse than kids in this regard. I think at the end of the day, when you go through Bully and its story, you start relating to characters within it. Bully, contrary to popular belief from those who don't know much about it, was a game for the bullied. There was a message there regardless of whether or not it was intentional. To be honest, Bully is not really the best title for this, as you don't actually play as a bully. You can, but that's not what this game is about. Jimmy actually came across as, well, yes, an ungrateful little bastard, but one that would probably stand up for the little guy. And also someone who probably would turn out to be a decent fella. Bully or Canis Canem was probably a great title for those who absolutely hated school in one form or another. It was and is likely that Jimmy's a sort of hero for some. The cowboy, pragmatic and defiant stand-up to the squabbles and ridiculous need to bully. With that in mind, I think it would benefit some people in more ways than entertaining purposes to play this. So with all that said, what happened to this great gem of a game? Well, Bully apparently sold over 1.5 million copies on the PlayStation 2. Adding the remaster across the other platforms, chances are this sold over 2 million copies, which is bloody good now and must have been ace back then. So it sold enough to warrant a sequel, yet here we are over a decade later and still no Bully 2. Over the years, there have been bits of information in regards to a sequel, but nothing really came up until after the remaster, which still shocks me how long it took to release. In 2009, Sean Lee stated in an interview that it looked like he would be doing the soundtrack for Bully 2 in the not so distant future. Great that Sean Lee would be back, but it seems either he was telling tall tales, Bully 2 was cancelled, or has been in pre-production all this time. I think it's safe to say that the not so distant future might have turned into the distant future. In 2011, more promising information came to light that made it likely we'd see Bully 2 in the new decade. Dan Houser, the co-founder of Rockstar Games, said in an interview that they didn't want to start doing Bully straight away, even though they liked it. They went on to create Max Payne 3 and would see about a sequel after that. In 2012, Rockstar Vancouver went defunct, and a year later, Rockstar filed a trademark application for Bully. However, as some of you may know, trademark applications are filed all the time. Often they need renewing, so this could have been the case back in 2013, and/or for what was to happen in 2016. Then in the same year, an uncredited voice actor in Bully, Stan Captain, claimed to be working on an action-adventure game for Take-Two Interactive. But that's for Take-Two, not Rockstar, so it could have been a number of titles. Although, later in that year, Captain stated on his blog that the title he was due to work on was cancelled. Put that together with Sean Lee's interview in 2009, and you could easily speculate that Bully was in the making and then cancelled all hush-hush-like. Then 2 years later, in 2015, the classic hoax affair erupted. A hoax circulated the internet that a Bully 2 senior year was releasing in October 2016. Even though it's a hoax, great idea for a sequel though. Now as I said, the trademark application could have been for what was to come in 2016, which was, as Rockstar had been doing previously, an anniversary edition for Bully on mobile systems. Earlier in that year though, Bully was made available on the PS4 via digital download, and this along with the anniversary edition could indicate that Rockstar haven't forgot about the game, and maybe, just maybe, promoting it in preparation for something in the near future. Had this been any other company, I'd have probably given up all hope of seeing a sequel a long while ago. In more recent times, in 2017, a Twitter account opened called Bully2Info. Since it opened up, supposed concept art for the sequel has appeared on its feed. We don't know whether or not these are for definite pieces of art for Bully 2, but they do have some consistency with previous possible leaks and seem to be in line with Bully's art style. If they are indeed real leaks, then it could suggest a sequel is in the works, or was being worked on at some point following Bully. Don't forget that some artists tend to draw up ideas for a sequel before the first game is even released, so these could be real, but concepts from 10 plus years ago that never went any further. So that was it. Bully did well, yet nothing big happened with the game following its release back in 2006, apart from the new additions. Now as I just said, had this been anyone but Rockstar, or maybe even Bethesda, I'd have drained all hope of a sequel a few years ago. However, it's not far-fetched to imagine Bully returning in sequel or even prequel form all these years later, because of the huge gaps between Rockstar's IPs. Red Dead Redemption 2 is currently at an 8-year gap from its predecessor. Now granted, Bully's been waiting at this time 12 years for its sequel, but considering how Rockstar appear to be focusing most of their resources and manpower on one game alone, it wouldn't surprise me if Bully 2 was to come a few years after Red Dead Redemption 2. Now in these videos I talk about how the games series need to return in some form or another, whether that is continuations, ports or even remasters. However, because Bully's fairly playable now, I mean yeah, it crashes on Windows 10 like a 3-year-old piloting an alien spaceship, it's still in a state where Rockstar could maybe try to fix that and then all would be fairly well. I don't see much point in them remastering this any further. This game needs to return in a sequel sort of way. So enough speculating on a possible release and all that, let's discuss what potential a Bully 2 could have in this day and age. Well, it has a lot of potential. It'd be first of all a sequel many have been dying for, and secondly, a breath of fresh air in the action-adventure scene. Even now, Bully doesn't really have a sister title, a catalogue of games you can say are truly like Bully. Yes, there are the usual titles often labelled as similar, your GTAs, Sleeping Dogs, Watch Dogs, etc., but they don't have strictly non-lethal combat and teenagers scrapping over condescending attitudes, nerdism and the fact that you even have an education, nor are there wedges or binning people. You know, I've just realised that environmental finishers need to appear in games more often, especially the wedges. There you go, another reason why this and the Condemned series need to return. I know the latter's a bit off topic and non-related, but it had great environmental finishers, and I made a video on it. Anyways, so Bully even now is unique and would be a nice change of pace to see in gaming. In terms of the narrative, I think it would be best to continue with the story of Jimmy Hopkins. If the Bully 2 hoax showed me one thing, it's that there's plenty of opportunity in Jimmy's senior years. They could even go to a college or university setting, away from Bulworth Academy. If American college, university films are anything to go by, there's a fair amount of bullying and childish petty behaviour there to warrant a college setting, and keep the non-lethal combat and stand up to Bully's message. Speaking of the latter, there's the potential for a sequel to explore more modern forms of torment. I grew up in a time where the internet and social media was rising up to new heights, and cyberbullying wasn't really a thing. Now that and other things appear to be very real problems, and if Bully 2 was to go the extra mile and tackle those issues, it could be, like I said, much more than a simple product of entertainment for a number of people, both young and older. Now I can't take credit for that idea as that belongs to Sam Loveridge, who in 2016 wrote a short but great article over at Digital Spy about Bully and a sequel. There were good points and suggestions made, so have a look at that if you're interested. Of course, a sequel has the potential to be much better than what came before it. Bully 2 could come with improved, more fluid combat, it could overhaul the mini-games, add new ones and make classes a lot more interesting, as well as add more of those. Reduce some of the mini-game repetition. The interactions with NPCs could be enhanced. I'd love to see more weapons such as paintball guns, could even have a paintball mini-game. There could be more pranks. Oh, there's so many more you could do. How about a few more punishments, washing floors and windows or litter picking? More jobs, more sports to partake in and even additional holiday events. There's a lot you could improve and add to the already great game that is Bully. All these little things and activities are a part of what made Bully so good. However, a question I asked myself when making this video was, could this even be done in today's world? Would it feel the same or even similar? The interesting thing I hear about this title often is how it's a special game for people. It has, for reasons they themselves struggle to explain, a special place in their heart. Now everyone has a game or set of games you could say that about, but Bully especially is one that crops up every now and then. It could be its setting, characters, writing, its difference to GTA, its message to the bullied and bullies, or simply that even today, years later, it's something unique. Whatever it is that made and makes this special for people, could that be replicated in a sequel? Or would Bully turn out to be one of those titles where that single game alone was enough? I suppose we'll never know until we get a sequel, but I think we can all agree, those who have played this at the very least, that it's a game that definitely deserves a continuation, and it'd be a shame to leave Bully and its world in the past for great interest in it to eventually dissipate. It was an exceptional concept that was probably ahead of its time, and one that we can only hope Rockstar never forget, and Take-Two eventually say, why not? Go make it. Go all in. Have a blast. Go on. It's what Ubisoft would do. So, on that note, I think that is where we'll finish up. Now let me know in the comments below, what are your thoughts? Have you played Bully? Do you remember it fondly? What form would you like to see this game return? And what would you like to see in a continuation? Let me know in the comments below what's on your mind and I'll give them a read. I'm interested to see what people have to say about this nowadays. So hit the like button if you like this video. You can also follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. Links to those are at the bottom of the description. Anyways, that's all from me. So until next time, I'll see you soon. Take it away, Johnny. I mean, Sean. Oh, bugger it. Bye.